In 2009, my family and I were having a lot of stress, and stress on all sides of our life. We had stress at church, we had stress at home, we had stress at work, and that whole year was really full of trouble for me and my family. So we had met a friend of mine just a couple months prior to, I guess it was September of 2009. He had come to me and he said that he was going on vacation in Savannah, Georgia. And I invited myself on his vacation. I said, do you mind if I go with you? And he said, are you serious? I said, oh, yeah, I've never done that before. I've never invited myself on somebody else's vacation. But I did, and so he said, sure, the more the merrier. And so sure enough, the following week on a Thursday, we left to go to Savannah, Georgia, and we got down there really early Friday morning, and it was me and my wife and him and his wife and his daughter and his father-in-law, and then there was another. He worked at Walmart, and so there was another couple from Chattanooga Walmart. He was the manager of that store, and so it was him and his wife, and so we all left and got down there really early Friday morning, and we went into town and just milled around in town, but I knew we were close to the ocean. I could smell it, the salt in the air, and the beach and everything, and I knew a little bit about Savannah, Georgia, but I'd never been there. And I love to fish. I'd rather fish than eat. I had rather fish than do anything in the world. Well, in Genesis, it says that God gives us dominion over a fish, and I knew that. And so I thought, well, this is great. I'm going to go out on the ocean, and I'm going to catch me a fish about the size of Moby Dick, and I'm going to come home, I'm going to mount it, and everybody's going to be envious of me. So we found somebody, to take us out on a charter, and we were going to go deep sea fishing, and so it was great. We woke up early Saturday morning and we got to the dock, and I was just like a kid in a candy store. I was so excited. And so we get on the boat, and as we're headed out the river to get to the ocean, the sun was coming up over my shoulder, and it was hitting all those clouds and the colors. You've heard of Thomas Kincaid, the painter of light. Well, it was the purples and the oranges and everything, and Thomas Kincaid doesn't have anything on the painter of light, and so I was just like, man, God must really love me in order, to give me a playground like this to play in, and I just thought it was fantastic, and so as the boat was going out, I looked over and saw those tall marsh grasses, and those big white birds that you see on television. I mean, I was just enamored with just all the beauty that I was seeing for the first time, and we got out into the ocean, and I was seated on the front of the boat. It was me and my buddy Chris and his father-in-law, and Carl, the other gentleman, was facing the way we were going, and the three of us were facing. So the boat's going this way, and the three of us are looking back at the captain, and so we started to hit some waves and everything, and one of the waves that we hit, I come up out of my chair a little bit, out of my seat, and there was a bar, a little round metal bar that went around the front of the boat, so I grabbed a hold of that. And Chris, my buddy, he gets up and he moves to where now he's facing the way we were going. He's been on the ocean before. I'd never been on the ocean. And I said, why did you do that? And he said, it's a smoother ride. A few moments later, the waves were getting a little bit bigger. And the captain, instead of slowing down, he actually sped up to power through the waves. And then, we were so far out in the ocean, I couldn't see land anymore. We were a long ways out there. And we were going to go out to the Gulf Stream. That's where the big fish, I guess, were at. Or, he knew where we were going and we didn't. But he sped up, and when he did, the next big wave that came, the boat come completely up out of the air. And when it did, it launched me up in the air, and I went straight up in the air, and when I came back down, the boat was on its way back up, And I came down in the seated position, and just all the pressure came out my back.
Oh, my word.
And Chris's father-in-law landed in the floor, and I landed on top of him. And I knew we were in the air because the motor, the propeller of the motor wasn't, it was a different sound, you know, it wasn't grabbing water. And I landed on top of Chris's father-in-law, and I didn't know what happened, you know, but the boat came to a complete stop there in the ocean, and I took my hands to get off of his father-in-law, and I put it on the seat. And when I pushed back up and to sit back down, I noticed that my legs didn't come with me. They were still attached, but I couldn't feel them. And instantly, it was just like a light switch went off, and I started screaming at the top of my lungs. I mean, the pain was so intense. I mean, I didn't know what was happening. It was almost as if somebody had poured gasoline on my legs and lit it on fire. And I said, you know, I was screaming, and Chris took me and turned me sideways and laid me down on the front of the boat. And I was just screaming. And it was the type of screaming like the other people that was on the boat, you know, the four of us, and then there was the captain and the first mate. You know, it was the type of screaming that, you know, I'm sure they were like, I wish this guy would just shut up, but I couldn't. I couldn't stop screaming. And finally, Carl, the other guy from Walmart, the other manager from Chattanooga, he yelled at the captain, and I mean, because this screaming went on for like 30, 35 minutes, and he yelled at the captain and said, call the Coast Guard. And so I asked, the sun was bright, it was a very sunny day, and I was laying there and my legs were burning. I mean, they were, so I asked Chris, I said, Chris, would you get some ice and put on my legs? And he did, and it was almost like 1,000 needles went through my legs all at one time, and I said, get it off, get it off. And, you know, I had no idea what was going on, and then all of a sudden, I went unconscious, and from the pain that I was in. And my buddy Chris, he gets over the top of me, and he's just slapping me, just in my face, you know, just one out right after the other. And I wake up, and he's over top of me, just wailing on me. And I said, dude, are you slapping me? And he said, Mark, you're scaring me to death. Please don't close your eyes again. And I said, Chris, I said, I'm in so much trouble. I said, I'm scared. You know, it was just terrible.
Wow.
And so about that time, I looked up in the air. I'm laying on my back, and I look up in the air, and I see a butterfly. Now, my degree's in biology, but I noticed on the way out there, I didn't see any butterfly bushes in the ocean. There's not any. But I see this butterfly, and I look up, and I said, Chris, do you see that butterfly? And he looked up, and he said, no, I don't see it. And I said, okay. Well, anytime a wave hit the boat, or the boat hit a wave, I was screaming. And we were just sitting there waiting for the Coast Guard to get there. And so about an hour passes, so you can imagine it was just, you know, constant screaming. And the Coast Guard gets there about an hour and a half later. And they had sent 2 cutters out there to intercept our vessel. And 2 people get on board. It was a lady and a man. And Chris had my left hand, and she grabbed a hold of my right hand, and she started doing, taking my vitals and blood pressure, and just, you know, I didn't know what was going on, and then I started going unconscious again. And I wake back up, and, you know, I can tell that it's a very serious situation by the way that everybody was talking, and I look up in the air, and I see another butterfly. And I said, Chris, do you see that butterfly? And he looks up, and he says, no, I don't see it. And I saw the lady look at him, and the eye contact between the 2 of them as if to say, this old boy's losing it, you know. And I saw that, and it kind of bothered me. But I knew what I was seeing. I was, you know. And so I asked her, I said, are they going to fly out here and get me? And she says, we're working on that, you know. And so a little bit of time passes, and they put 1 cutter in front of us and 1 behind us to try to keep the waves from hitting us. And we're going a whopping 4 knots an hour, which is very slow. So it was constant screaming. but I couldn't help it. I had no idea what was happening to me. And it took from the time my accident happened to the time we got into a marina, not the marina that we came out of, but the closest one. It took 4.5 hours from the time the accident happened till I got to the marina.
So were you aware of your legs, or was it just sheer pain that you're experiencing?
It was so much pain. That was what was causing me to go unconscious, and I didn't know that at the time. I didn't know where the pain was coming from. I knew I wasn't bleeding or anything, but I had no idea what was happening to me. It was about an hour later, and I look up in the air again, and I see another butterfly. And this time I'm thinking, Chris is a little slow. So I took my finger and I followed that butterfly across the air. And I said, Chris, do you see that butterfly right there? I mean, it was such an odd thing, and he looks up as I'm following across, he sees it and he says, yes, I see it. And I thought, oh, thank God, this is wonderful. I know, because I'd recognized that look between the two of them before. And I didn't want to, I knew what I was seeing, but I didn't want to, say, like, yep, you guys are crazy. I knew I was in pain, so right before, they had called our wives and they were going to meet us there at the marina. And so when we get there, we pull up and there's all the fire trucks and the ambulances and everything. And you can imagine from the time they get the call 4.5 hours later, they're anxious for me to get there. And when the firefighters get on board, they put me on a backboard and I'm screaming at the top of my lungs. And they pick me up on that backboard and they set me there on the dock. And as I'm laying there, all of a sudden a firefighter grabs a hold of my neck like this right here. And he's behind me and he says, I've got his cervical secured. He said, hey buddy, what's your name? And I said, Mark. And he said, well, my name's Tommy. He said, I'm going to take care of you. I'm laying on my back looking straight up in the sky and the sun is so bright. I close my eyes and out of nowhere, I don't know where this guy came from, but I'm assuming he was a security guard there at the marina maybe, but he was an older guy. And he slaps me. He's like, I opened my eyes because I knew it wasn't the firefighter, because, and he said that his name was Tommy. And Tommy had both hands around my neck. And so I was like, I'm fine, Well, I opened my eyes because I'm getting slapped. And a few minutes later, you can't look at the sun. So I closed my eyes again. And here this old guy starts slapping me again. He's like, Mark, Mark, Mark. And finally, I've been slapped all day long. Tommy, with this very authoritative voice, he says, hey, buddy, you slap him one more time, man, you're going to have problems. And I thought, thank God somebody's on my side. This is great. This is wonderful. Well, they put me get me in the ambulance, and my wife is in the ambulance with me, and I could tell by the roar of the engine how fast we were going. And the driver of the ambulance was like, get out of the way, and I can tell by his tone that, it's a serious situation, and I didn't know at the time what was happening, but there was security for the marina, and they was driving ahead and cutting roads off on each side, and it was just a straight shot. And so we get to the hospital there in Savannah, and as I'm on that gurney and they're wheeling me into the hospital from the ambulance, I look up and painted on the ceiling tile is a butterfly. I didn't think anything about it, and so we get back there and the doctors, they're tossing me and turning me and I'm screaming and, just it's total chaos. There's so many people and finally, all of a sudden, everything just comes to a standstill and it's quiet. And it was like, and I'm not hurting no more and I'm not screaming no more. Well, apparently the medicine that they gave me had kicked in and they had left the room. The doctors had left the room. It was just my wife and I in the room. And I'm typically not a rude person. But I said, can I just get some water in here, please? I was so thirsty, you know, and so a nurse came in, and my wife was a nurse, and so that nurse came in, and she said, she heard that, and she said, has the doctor not been in here to talk to you yet? And she said, no. And so she goes and gets the doctor, and the doctor comes in, and he says, come here. And my wife could tell by his tone that what she was getting ready to hear was probably not going to be good. And so he took the x-rays up, and he threw them up, and he says, I can clean all this up, and all this I can clean up, but it's this piece right here. It's cut his spinal cord 60%, and he's never going to walk again. Well, my wife came back, and I said, what did he say? And she said, you're going to be fine. Well, she wouldn't have been a good poker player because she started crying right away. And I said, that's not what he said, is it? And she said, no. And I said, what did he say? And she says, there's a good chance you're never going to walk again. That's hard to hear. And it's even hard for me to still, I mean, that was 15 years ago. It was September 19th. And so 15 years ago was just this past month. And I was like, she said, what do I do? And I said, well, call the church. Call the church and have them start praying. I said, call my mom and dad, tell them. And so she did. And my brother, he was a professional motorcycle racer, you know, the street bikes, you know. And he had a BMW coupe at the time. And he went to get my mom and dad, and they said, well, we're going to fly down there. And he says, no, get in the car. He said, I'll beat you down there. He said, I'll beat a flight, there, you know. And so my dad is 6'3", my brother's 6'2", my mom's normal 5 foot something height, you know, for a lady, and my sister is 6'3". So they all piled in, the four of them piled in that BMW coupe, and he got down there, you know, late that night, and he said, Mark, I broke every speed law. He said, they were just scared to death. You know, they wanted to get down there to me. So the next day, I went and I had my surgery, my back surgery, and it lasted 10.5 hours. And it was just, I woke up in ICU, and it was terrible. And, you know, I stayed in ICU for a couple of days. And, but once I was out of ICU, they took me to my regular room, and it was the room that I was going to stay in for a few days. And I wake up, I open my eyes, and painted on the ceiling tile above me is another butterfly. Now, butterflies are not everywhere. It just seems like they're everywhere I'm at, you know. And it's just odd, you know. And so I stayed there 9 days, and there was a hospital. There's a hospital in Atlanta, Georgia called Shepherd Center. And the only way you get into Shepherd Center is either through a spinal cord injury or a brain injury. And they do other specialized stuff, but that's the main two things that they concentrate on. And so I was like, you know, I want to go there. I want to be closer to my family in Cleveland, Tennessee, and I want to be closer to my church family. And it's 2 hours away instead of 6 hours away. And so we decided that that's the route that we're going to go. And so after 9 days of being there in Savannah, we decided to go there. And I had a choice. I could either get on a medical transport for $1,300. I could get on an ambulance for $3,000, or I could fly for $13,000. Well, I knew that my medical bills were going to be astronomical. So I thought, well, I'm going to go with the medical transport, you know, $1,300, and we'll just, so we get on the medical transport, and I could see my mother and my wife were going to follow us, and my brother was going to lead us. He travels a lot, and he's very familiar with Atlanta. And so he said, I know where the hospital is. So he was going to be in front of us. And so my mother and my wife, I could see them, and they could see me, and I would hold up the number. We made a little code. I would hold up the number 3 for I love you, and they would hold up the number 4 for I love you too. And that was just our way of communicating back and forth, you know. And they would hold up the number 3, I would hold up the number 4, you know, just, hey, everything's fine, you know. It's a 4-hour trip. And so about 20 miles south of Atlanta, the road started getting rough. It was, just boom, 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 boom. And I got so weak, I couldn't hold up my arm anymore. The lady that was back there with me, she's like, Mark, are you okay? And I don't even remember her name, but she was so sweet. She was like, are you okay? I said, I don't know, something's not right. She said, well, we're almost there. We're almost there. We get there to the hospital, and they put me on the gurney, and they're taking me through the hospital. I look up, as we're traveling down through the hallway, I look up and painted on ceiling tiles another butterfly. And I didn't think much about it. Had no idea what the butterflies mean or anything. But they get me to my room, and it's I'm just back there by myself. None of my family back there or anything. And my nurse comes in, and I was like, something's not right. Something's not. I don't feel good. And she goes, it's okay. It's okay. Well, later on that night, my family had gone to find a hotel and find arrangements for them to stay. All that night, I just knew something wasn't right. I was telling my nurse, and it was this big guy. He had huge muscles, and I remember and he said, listen, buddy, he said, you're just in a new place, but you can't be in a better place than you are right now with your condition. You're in one of the best hospitals in the nation. I thought, well, I hope you're right, because I said, I just don't feel good, and so the next morning, I guess after 9 days, you begin to stink without a shower. I don't know. So they picked me up in a Hoyer lift to take me to give me a shower, and the room is just spinning. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, what's going on? And they took me, they gave me a shower, and the doctor came into the room. She said, Mr. Wells, stick out your tongue. And I stuck out my tongue, and it was as white as a sheet of paper. And she said, you're bleeding internally, and we need to do some things very quickly. And I had no idea what she was talking about. And she said, I'm going to need you to sign a couple pieces of paper. And I'm thinking, well, can paper not work, not wait till later, And so she says, this first piece of paper is basically saying that I don't have time to put you to sleep. And then the other piece of paper is that you need blood because, and I didn't know how much blood I had lost. And she said, I don't have time to put you to sleep. And so she cut me right here above my collarbone, and she, she gave me a local anesthetic right there, which, that didn't hurt. But the next part I'll never forget as long as I live. She said, now this next part's going to hurt. And I said, what are you going to do? She says, well, I need to stick a chest tube in you. Well, when they bring the crash cart in, all these people just filled the room, because somebody is almost to the point of dying. And so I was so nervous. I didn't know what was going on. So I'm just, I have my head turned, and she puts this tube in between a couple of my ribs, and all of a sudden she jabs it in there, and it's just like, it's like a 22 rifle going off. It was so loud, and I just literally started shaking because it scared me so bad. But then, instantly, it was almost, the blood had came out, not all of it at once, but, she told me that they had got about 3/4 of a gallon of blood out of my chest cavity. And, having studied biology, I know that was pushing the limits to I was close to dying. And it's just really scary.
For one thing, you don't have enough blood.
Yeah.
And then it's putting pressure internally.
Yeah.
Is that the?
Yeah, and that's why I was feeling so weak that previous night, and telling my doc, and it's just odd how your body, even things that are happening internal, you're thinking something is not right. This place that I went to that I thought I was going to get better, it started off really rough. I mean, and I was nervous and everything. But after they took me to ICU after that, and after I was in ICU for a few days, they were going to take me to my regular room. And when they did, they brought me in, and I noticed that my bed was not made up. Imprinted in ink on my bed was a butterfly. My nurse comes in, she's got butterfly scrubs on, she's got a butterfly hair clasp in her hair, and butterfly tattoos on her arm. It was the weirdest thing. I'm thinking, what is, should the Georgia Bulldogs not be called the Georgia Butterflies? I mean, I had no clue what all the butterflies meant. And so I stayed there at Shepherd Center for almost 3 months. And so came home after that, and I was sitting there one day and I was reading my Bible, and it's a story that we've all heard before. It's in Luke chapter 8, verse number 22 through 25. It says, "Now it came to pass on a certain day that he went into a ship with his disciples, and he said unto them, Let us go over into the other side of the lake. And they launched forth. But as they sailed, he fell asleep, and there came down a storm of wind on the lake, and they were filled with water and were in jeopardy. And they came to him and awoke him, saying, Master, Master, we perish. Then he arose and rebuked the wind and the raging of the water, and they ceased. And there was a calm. And he said unto them, Where is your faith? And they, being afraid, wondered, saying one to another, What manner of man is this? For he commandeth even the winds and water, and they obey him." Back up there in verse number 24, the last 5 words, it says, "And there was a calm." And when I read that day, now I was a Sunday school teacher before, and I'd read this story many times before. But when I read it that day, sitting at home after I got back home from Shepherd Center, those last 5 words, "and there was a calm," it was almost like the Holy Spirit, God himself, spoke to my heart, and he said, "Hey, Mark, do you remember when you were on the ocean and you saw those butterflies?" He said, "I did that for you." I was screaming at the top of my lungs, except for the 3 times that I saw those butterflies. And then it was almost like the Holy Spirit said, "Mark, I had them above your head. I had them on your bed." In Numbers chapter 22, there's a talking donkey. that will blow your theology all apart. And then in Daniel, a hungry pride of lions. And then in Jonah, a great fish. Do you not think that the God, the creator of this whole universe, that can control all those things, can control the wings of 3 small butterflies for one of his that's in a lot of trouble? And he did that for me. That's what I believe. I believe that nothing happens without God's permission. Not a blade of grass grows, nothing. So that's what the meaning of the butterflies were for me. Let me tell you what my church did for me. My church, they called me one day and they said, "Mark, what can we do for you?" And I said, "I don't know. I mean, I was a Sunday school teacher. I was the one that, me and my wife, we were the ones that was always giving on, ministry. And all of a sudden, we're on the receiving end." And I said, "I don't know." But on a Saturday, about 25 men showed up to my house. We had a swimming pool, and we had started building a privacy fence on it, to go around it. We didn't have it finished, but they finished that for me. They landscaped the whole thing. They cut down a tree that needed cut down. They went inside my house. They pulled up the carpet, because wheelchairs on carpet is hard. They put can lights in my ceiling. I go into the physical therapy room at Shepherd Center, and the outline of my house is on with blue tape, because they want to make sure. And they did that because there was an engineer at my house that had given them the dimensions. And they did that because they loved me.
Wow.
And I don't know what people do without a church family. I don't. I don't know how to make it. Well, really, they don't make it. And it was such a blessing to know that they did that for me. John 10:29 says, "My Father which gave them to me is greater than all, and no man is able to pluck them out of my Father's hand." I noticed that when I was at Shepherd Center, I found my name on everything. I found it on my underwear. I found it on my t-shirts. I found it on my socks. I picked up my shoe, and there was a curve, and there was a little white place, and imprinted in the ink on that little white place was my name. Well, my wife was a nurse. She knows if your name's not written on it in a hospital, it's gone. John 10:29 says, "Nobody's able to take me out of my Father's hand." My name is written down somewhere that there's nobody, not even the devil, can take me out of my Father's hand. My name's written down in the book of life. And they said that I wouldn't walk again. Another verse that I like to talk about is Philippians chapter 4, verse number 6. And again, it's verses that we've all heard before. It says, "Be careful for nothing, But in everything, and by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God, and the peace of God, which passes all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. Now, in the English language, that verse in verse number 7, and, that's a conjunction. That says that if you do what was spoken to previously, then this will come. Let your request be made known unto God, and the peace of God that passes all understanding will keep you. And I thought, okay, God, I want to walk again. I want to take steps of my own. You know, I used to play on the church softball team. I used to run with my friends. And now I can't even walk. I said, please, God, please just let me walk. And it's not. In verse number 11 in the same chapter, Paul says this, not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. I know both how to be abased, and I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I'm instructed both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. Here's what I've learned through studying the Word of God. If I quit, I'll never know the end that God had planned for me from the very beginning of time. So I knew that I wasn't going to quit. Even if He didn't allow me to walk, I knew that I wasn't going to quit. I was going to go and I was going to share the love of God with my Sunday school class. Anybody that would listen to me, I was going to share my testimony. Job 23:10 says, but He knoweth the way that I take. When He hath tried me, I shall come forth as gold. The Bible refers to this as dross, D-R-O-S-S. It's what you do when you heat metal up and all the impurities come to the top. Here's what I've learned. I used to be a Sunday school teacher, and I taught for a long time, 8-9 years. But I have talked more to people about what Christ has done for me personally than I did in those 8 years of teaching Sunday school every Sunday morning. I don't understand why He allows things to happen. But here's what I learned. I learned that I wasn't going to ask why. Not that asking why is wrong, because Job did in the book of Job. Why do bad things happen to good people? I felt like I was a good person. I felt like I was a Christian. I felt I'm one of His. But bad things happen to all of us. But instead of asking why, I was going to ask what. What, God, do you want me to learn from this? And what He wants me to learn is, even though I'm in the condition that I am, I need to share with people what He's done for me. So that happened in 2009. In 2011, I wanted to go back to Savannah, and I wanted to meet that firefighter that had a hold of my neck that day. So I go and I find the closest fire station to where my accident happened. And I'm in my wheelchair, and I go wheeling up there, and I knock on the door, and this lady answers the door, and she said, can I help you? And I said, yeah. I said, I got hurt down here a couple of years ago. And I said, I want to find the firefighter that helped me that day. I said, I just want to say thank you to him for what he did for me. And she said, well, do you know who he is? I said, all I know is his name is Tommy, and he's got a very authoritative voice. And she goes, I know who you're talking about. He's actually been promoted to a lieutenant, and he's moved to Savannah because we were out on Tybee Island. She said, he's in Savannah now. She said, but if you leave your name and number, I'll have him call you. This was on a Friday. Well, this was the weekend of Christmas, right before Christmas. And on a Saturday night, the next day on a Saturday, about 10 o'clock at night, my phone rings. And I pick up the phone, I said, hello, and here's that voice I'd heard a couple years ago. He said, is this Mr. Wells? I said, it is. And he said, hey, this is Lieutenant Tommy Blackson with the Savannah Fire Department. I hear you're looking for me. I said, yes, sir. I said, I'm down in Savannah. I just want to say thank you. I'd like to meet up with you just to say thank you for what you did for me that day. I said, I don't know whether you recall this or not. I said, but there was this old guy that was slapping me. If you can help me find him too, I'd appreciate it. And he laughed. He said, boy, you were having a hard day that day, weren't you? And I said, yes, sir, I was. He said, how are you doing, Mark? And I said, I'm okay. I said, I'm in a wheelchair, but, uh, you know, things are hard, but I'm going to be okay. And he said, Mark, I don't believe in coincidences. I said, neither do I. He said, I actually have another job. I said, really? What do you do? He said, I'm a pastor of a church. I said, really? I said, I would love to come and give my testimony at your church. He said, you have tomorrow's service. Now, this is Christmas service. And he just gave me the service of the church. He's never heard my testimony, you know. And I said, okay, I'll be there. And so I went and I gave my testimony. And the part where I say, I don't see how people make it without a church family, at the end of service, there was a young man that came down. He was in his 20s. He came down to pray. And at the end of service, he come up to me and he said, I ran away when I was a little boy. And he said, I don't have a family until today. He said, I'm joining the church. And I thought, how in the world can a sovereign God use somebody as broken as I am to bring somebody into the family of God? I mean, he's just awesome, you know. And so I thought he's going to use my testimony to bring people in.
Yeah.
I went back to work in 2010, and the job that I had to climb a flight of stairs. And the economy was so bad back then. I don't know why my job kept me, but they did. But I went, after the doctor released me, I went back and I gave him the doctor's release. And the number 2 man in the company came down to the HR department and he said, so you ready to come back to work, Mark? And I said, yeah, I'm going to give it a try. I was so weak. I wasn't going to be able to climb those stairs, but I was going to give it a shot. But he had a piece of paper, and he slid it across the table to me, and he says, what about this job right here? I said, what is it? And I looked, and that job was created 2 years prior, but they didn't hire for it because the economy was so bad, we were in a hiring freeze. And he says, we created this 2 years ago, and we believe that you can do it. And I was like, I just broke down and started crying because you know how Scripture says that, you know, God goes before you. 2 years ago, that job wasn't filled because God knew that that was my job and I needed that job. And that's just where my faith is. It's just that things don't happen by accident. But in 2014, my wife of 17 and a half years came in and she said, I'm leaving. And I was like, what do you mean you're leaving? I mean, she was a nurse. She helped me through the hardest part of my life. And I was like, so it was spiritual, physical, and then the last part was emotional. And if God, I loved her. And if God would have came to me and said, Mark, I'm willing to heal you completely the way you were prior to your accident, or you can stay like you are and keep your wife, which you choose, I would have chose her because I loved her. And so I was just devastated. I was an emotional wreck. I mean, I was so hurt, so just nothing worse in my mind could ever happen to me than that right there. But I was reading a Christian magazine, and this was after my divorce, and I picked up a local Christian magazine, the Good News magazine. That's the title of it. And I read this article, and as I was reading the article, I had started writing a book. It was called Hope Found in the Wings of a Butterfly. And I was just going to, and I had dedicated a chapter of it to her. That chapter was called Ambushed by Grace. I was going to give her perspective of what she went through when my accident happened. But I couldn't write another word. And I didn't want to bash her because I loved her. I didn't want to, so I thought, well, maybe this person who wrote this article can help me write my book, ghostwrite my book for me. And I thought, no. But at the bottom of this little article, it says, you can follow me and through my glimpses of heaven on Facebook. And so I thought, okay, nah, I ain't gonna do it. But imprinted in ink on that page was 4 butterflies. And I thought, okay, Lord, I'm gonna do that. So I reached out to this person and I said, hey, could you help me, She said, well, I'd love to hear your testimony. And I told her. And she says, I think I can help you. So I'd like to meet you. So we met. Lo and behold, here comes this beautiful woman, and she's single. And I thought, well, now we're married, and it's wonderful. It's like, cause that's not why. She says I use the book as a pickup line to her, but that's not the case at all. It's just like God's going to take care of me, and He gave me this wonderful wife who loves me for the way I am, with my paralysis and everything. One more scripture and I'm done. But it says this in Mark chapter 10, verse number 46 through 52. It says, and they came to Jericho, and as he went out Jericho with his disciples and a great number of people, blind Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, sat by the highway side begging. And when he had heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, Jesus, thou son of David, have mercy on me. And many charged him that he should hold his peace, but he cried the more a great deal, Thou son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus stood still and commanded him to be called. And they called the blind man, saying unto him, Be of good comfort, rise, he calleth thee. And he, casting away his garment, rose and came to Jesus. And Jesus answered and said unto him, What wilt thou that I should do unto thee? The blind man said unto him, Lord, that I might receive my sight. And Jesus said unto him, Go thy way, thy faith hath made thee whole. And immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus in the way. In verse number 49, Jesus stood still. And he said, What do you want me to do for you? And it was like, Lord, I want to walk again. And he says, Mark, you just need faith. So I started in my wheelchair. And then I got down to, then I went to a walker. And then I got to using 2 canes. And then 1 cane. And then nothing. And it's like, I can't feel my legs from my waist down. It's the weirdest thing. But I can walk. Now, a lot of people would say, well, that's nothing. And you're right, because a lot of people walk and it's no big deal to them. But let me tell you what the miracle is. The miracle is not that I can walk. I'll show you the miracle. There was one day that I knelt down when I was 12 years old. And I sit there and I prayed to God Almighty. And I said, God, would you come into my heart? That's the miracle. Because you can go to a hospital and they can help make you better. But nobody can do what Jesus Christ can do and come into your heart. He's the only one. He's the only one that can get you to heaven. This is the miracle in my life. It's not that I can walk. It's that one day when I die or whatever, I'm going to go be with Him. And there's where I'm going to spend eternity. That's the miracle of life. The odd thing is, too, is I have perfect balance right here on my knees. I'm like that weeble. I wobble, but I don't fall down. It's great. My balance is bad. I've got all these medical things wrong with me. But look what Jesus has done for me. And my Bible teaches me that He's no respecter of persons. So if He's willing to do it for me, He's willing to do it for you. All you have to do is believe in Him and ask Him to come into your heart like I did as a 12-year-old boy. And He'll do that. I promise you, He will do that. You find somebody, and if you need to get in touch with me, find somebody that will lead you to Him and change your life for eternity. That's it.
That's good. Thank you. Just to be sure.